Welcome back to the show, everyone. I'm Mia.
And I'm Daniel. Today we're diving into persistence, resilience, and what genuinely separates people who eventually succeed from people who quit somewhere along the way.
Picture this for a second. You have just hit this massive soul-crushing wall on a project you care deeply about.
We have definitely all been there.
Right. I mean, we all know that visceral sort of game over moment in life where your stomach drops and the frustration just boils over. But what actually happens in your brain during that exact split second? Like when you decide whether to walk away or try again. Because neurologically speaking, the human brain processes the act of quitting a goal using some of the very same neural pathways that process actual physical pain.
So giving up literally hurts.
Exactly. Giving up hurts. Yet, you can look at two different people facing the exact same failure, and their responses are just entirely different. One person walks away to escape the pain, and the other person absorbs that same pain, hits restart, and tries a whole new strategy.
And honestly, the divergence in that exact split second is, well, it's one of the most compelling behavioral mysteries we have. And the direction you choose in that moment dictates the entire trajectory of your life, your career, your relationships, all of it.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. I am so glad you are joining us today. Settle in, because we are on a mission to decode the psychology of persistence. We are looking directly at why some people keep going after years of failure, while others tap out after a single minor setback.
It is a huge topic.
It really is. And to do this, we are unpacking a massive stack of research today. We've got decades of psychology studies, behavioral science, and some really fascinating elite performance research.
And looking at this data, we can immediately dismantle the biggest myth out there. Persistence is not a fixed innate personality trait.
Wait, really?
No, absolutely not. You are not born with some sort of grit gene. The research overwhelmingly proves that persistence is a highly learnable skill. It is a biological and psychological framework built through specific mindsets, habits, and crucially, incredibly deliberate ways of interpreting failure.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because if persistence is a learnable skill, that changes the entire game for anyone listening who feels like they just naturally lack follow-through.
It changes everything.
But before we can look at the actual actions of persistent people, we have to look at the internal operating system running those actions.
Yeah. And that operating system really starts with how you interpret setbacks. Most people listening are probably already familiar with psychologist Carol Dweck's baseline research on mindsets.
Right, the whole fixed versus growth mindset thing.
Exactly. We all know the basic idea. A fixed mindset assumes your talent is static, while a growth mindset assumes you can improve through effort. But what the recent research reveals is how deeply misunderstood that concept has actually become. We have developed this sort of epidemic of what researchers call the false growth mindset.
Oh, is that when people just praise themselves or like their kids for putting in effort, regardless of whether that effort actually worked?
Precisely. People will fail, but then they tell themselves, well, I tried really hard, so I have a growth mindset. But a true growth mindset is not just about blind effort. It is about tying that effort directly to learning and strategy adjustment.
So it's the feedback loop.
Yes. And when you look at the neuroscience behind this, it is genuinely staggering. Researchers will actually hook people up to EEG machines to monitor their brain waves as they make mistakes. They are looking for something called the error-related negativity signal, or the ERN.
Which is basically the brain's internal alarm bell for when you mess up, right?
Exactly. So when a person with a deeply fixed mindset makes an error, their brain shows very little ERN activity. Their brain literally tunes out the mistake to protect their ego.
Because to them, failure is a permanent verdict on their identity.
Yes, exactly. But when a person with a true growth mindset makes an error, that ERN signal lights up like a fireworks display. Their brain pays hyper attention to the failure, processing it as highly valuable diagnostic data.
Wow.
They are not protecting their ego. They are actively scanning the wreckage to figure out which specific part broke down so they can fix it.
That distinction is incredible. It's almost like if your brain treats failure as a courtroom verdict, your ego forces you to look away. Quitting becomes the only logical way to escape the judge, basically.
That is a great way to put it.
But if your brain treats failure like a diagnostic test in a mechanic's garage, you lean in, you run the codes, and you just find out you need a new alternator. There's no shame in it.
What's fascinating here is that this diagnostic approach extends well beyond just Dweck's work. It aligns perfectly with Martin Seligman's research on learned optimism.
Oh, Seligman. I love his stuff.
It's brilliant. Seligman found that our persistence is dictated by our explanatory styles, which is the literal narrative we construct in our heads to explain why a bad thing just happened.
And the pessimist's explanatory style treats a failure as permanent, personal, and pervasive. Like if they bomb a presentation, they tell themselves, I will always be terrible at this. It is because I am fundamentally flawed, and it means I am going to fail at my entire career. It just bleeds into everything.
It catastrophizes the event. While the optimistic explanatory style contains the damage, they see the exact same bombed presentation as temporary, specific, and limited.
So they might tell themselves, well, I didn't prepare enough for this specific meeting, so this particular approach failed. But it has no bearing on my overall competence.
Exactly. That tiny shift in the internal narrative, from a permanent character flaw to a temporary tactical error, that is the biological mechanism that keeps the earn signal active and keeps you engaged in the process.
So we have the neurological foundation here. We know we need to train our brains to look at errors as data, not verdicts. But society has essentially tattooed the 10,000-hour rule on our collective foreheads.
They really have.
So I have to ask, if I just put my head down, ignore the sting of failure, and blindly grind for a decade, shouldn't that eventually break the wall down?
No, and honestly, that is the most dangerous trap in the pursuit of any goal. Uncalibrated repetition does not build excellence. It just permanently cements your bad habits.
Really? So just grinding isn't enough?
Not at all. This is where researcher Anders Ericsson's concept of deliberate practice comes in. The people who exhibit supernormal persistence are not just grinding away blindly. They are actively managing their cognitive load across 3 very specific zones of challenge.
Walk us through those zones. What does that actually look like?
Sure. So the first is the comfort zone. This is where you are doing tasks you have already mastered. The stress is low, but the growth is absolutely zero. And sadly, a lot of people mistake spending 10,000 hours in the comfort zone for hard work.
Right, because they are busy, but they aren't actually improving.
Exactly. Now, beyond that is the stretch zone or the learning zone. The tasks here are difficult and they require your file focus, but you have the underlying capacity to manage them. This is the only place where deliberate practice actually occurs.
But if you keep pushing, or if you just blindly grind without a strategy, you fall off the cliff into the third zone.
Yeah, the panic zone. When the challenge so wildly exceeds your current capacity, your brain literally perceives it as a mortal threat. The amygdala takes over. Cortisol floods your prefrontal cortex, and your working memory effectively shuts down.
Oh, wow. So you literally cannot learn at that point.
Right. You lose the biological ability to encode new information or learn from the mistakes you are making. Real persistence is the intelligent, adaptive management of staying in that stretch zone and immediately pulling back when you sense the panic zone taking over.
The problem with the stretch zone, though, is that it is inherently uncomfortable. I mean, you are constantly operating just past the edge of your abilities, which guarantees you are going to fail repeatedly.
Yes, failure is baked into the stretch zone.
So how do persistent people survive that constant emotional friction? It sounds exhausting.
It can be, but they understand and conquer a psychological phenomenon called effective forecasting.
Effective forecasting. Okay, what is that?
Basically, as humans, our brains are terrible at predicting the future, particularly when it comes to our own emotional states. We wildly overestimate how devastating a future failure will actually feel. Why
do our brains do that? I mean, it seems like a terrible design flaw to constantly convince ourselves that a setback is going to destroy us.
It really does seem like a flaw, but it is actually a leftover evolutionary protective mechanism. For our ancient ancestors, failing at a critical task like a hunt or maintaining social standing in the tribe often meant physical death or exile.
Oh, so the stakes actually were life and death back then.
Exactly. And our modern brains are still running that ancient hardware. So when you are thinking about starting a difficult business or even just asking someone out, your brain sounds a 5-alarm fire. It anticipates that failing will feel like literal social and physical death.
Which leads to preemptive quitting. We give up before we even start, avoiding a feeling that hasn't even happened yet. We are basically letting a ghost scare us out of our goals.
That is a perfect way to describe it. And when failure inevitably does happen, how you process that emotional hit determines if you will ever try again. The research shows 2 fatal extremes here.
What are they?
Well, the first is suppressing the disappointment entirely, putting on a toxic positivity mask and pretending it doesn't hurt. That kills long-term persistence because the unacknowledged stress compounds over time. But the other extreme, spiraling into harsh self-judgment and shame, that is just as destructive.
See, I hear the term self-compassion in the research, and my immediate cynical thought is that this is just a permission slip to be lazy.
A lot of people feel that way.
Right. Doesn't being kind to yourself after a massive failure just lower your standards and give you an excuse to stay in the comfort zone?
It is a totally valid concern, but sports psychology completely dismantles that assumption. Think about an elite quarterback who just threw a devastating interception in the fourth quarter. If they engage in harsh self-judgment, just beating themselves up on the sideline, they are triggering that same evolutionary fight-or-flight response. Cortisol spikes, their working memory narrows, and they stay trapped in the panic zone. Their recovery is delayed.
So they basically carry the mistake into the next play.
Exactly. But the athletes who practice active self-compassion, which means acknowledging the failure without attaching it to their core worth, they experience a rapid physiological reset. Their heart rate variability actually stabilizes.
It is amazing.
By not being consumed by shame, they clear their cognitive bandwidth. That allows them to rapidly analyze the mistake, adjust the strategy, and get back into the stretch zone. Self-compassion doesn't lower your standards. It is literally the biological mechanism that accelerates your recovery time.
That completely flips the script.
Okay.
You are not letting yourself off the hook. You are just refusing to let shame slow down your reboot process.
Yes, beautifully said.
So, okay, once you have recovered emotionally, how do you rebuild the internal engine? You are staring at the project again. How do you find the motivation to actually execute the new strategy?
That requires looking at your locus of control. This is a psychological term for how much you believe you genuinely influence the outcomes in your life.
Okay, so internal versus external control.
Right. If you have an external locus of control, you fundamentally believe outcomes are dictated by luck, the economy, or just powerful people holding you back. If you hold that belief, persistence is genuinely illogical. Why keep trying if your effort doesn't change the math?
You have to cultivate an internal locus of control, like the deeply held belief that your specific effort moves the needle. And the research ties this directly to Albert Bandura's concept of self-efficacy, right?
Yes, Bandura's work is central to this.
What I love about self-efficacy is that it is not a blanket personality trait. It is almost like a video game skill tree. You, listening to this right now, might have level 10 self-efficacy for your professional job. You know you can execute. But you might have level 1 self-efficacy for learning new language or cooking a meal. It is incredibly task-specific.
And because it is task-specific, it has to be built from scratch in every new domain you enter. Bandura proved that self-efficacy is built almost exclusively through mastery experiences.
Which are basically small, undeniable early wins.
Exactly. You don't build self-efficacy by giving yourself pep talks in the mirror. You build it by successfully executing a tiny, manageable part of the goal. That provides undeniable proof to your brain that your effort actually works.
This context completely changes how we look at those famous marshmallow studies on delayed gratification.
Oh, absolutely.
For decades, the narrative was that they put a kid in a room with a marshmallow, and if the kid had the innate willpower to wait 15 minutes, they got 2 marshmallows. And we all just assumed that innate willpower dictated their future success.
The new research, particularly studies done at the University of Rochester, completely dismantled that old narrative. They looked at the mechanism of trust instead.
How did they do that?
Well, in the new studies, they manipulated the environment before the marshmallow test even happened. They put the kids in a room with an adult who promised them a set of amazing art supplies. For half the kids, the adult actually delivered the supplies. For the other half, the adult flaked and brought nothing.
So they intentionally broke the kids' trust.
Yes. Then they ran the standard marshmallow test. And the kids who had experienced the unreliable adult almost universally ate the marshmallow immediately. It had absolutely nothing to do with innate willpower.
Wow.
The kids were making a highly rational decision based on their environment. Their environment had taught them that promises are empty and future rewards are a lie.
So delayed gratification, and by extension, long-term persistence, is not about white-knuckling your way through temptation. It is about whether your past environments have allowed you to build trust in the system. If your effort has historically resulted in rewards, you trust the process and you wait. If your effort has historically been ignored or punished, You take whatever immediate comfort you can get.
Which highlights a really crucial reality. We do not build this internal engine in a vacuum. The external environment, the people and the culture surrounding us, acts as an invisible hand on our ability to persist. A major factor here is something called reflected appraisal.
Reflected appraisal.
Yep.
That is essentially seeing yourself through the mirror of how others view you.
Right. When you are pushing through the messy middle of a long-term goal, your own internal self-efficacy will inevitably falter. It just will. During those valleys of intense doubt, persistent people rely on reflected appraisal. They borrow the belief that trusted mentors or peers have in them, and they use it as a bridge until their own internal belief catches back up.
But the broader culture matters just as much as our inner circle. The research highlights that in environments that destigmatize failure, like, say, certain scientific communities or tech hubs, people take far more risks.
Right, because failure is normalized as part of the data collection process.
Exactly. But in cultures with a heavy social stigma around being wrong, people hide their mistakes, refuse to share data, and they quit early just to avoid the social cost of failing visibly.
And this is deeply tied to something called the iceberg illusion. Observers constantly overestimate the role of innate natural talent in other people because they only see the polished success sitting above the waterline.
We see the gold medal, the published book, the booming business.
Right.
We completely miss the massive, ugly, submerged iceberg of failed prototypes, rejected drafts, and embarrassing public blunders that actually build to success. We compare our messy internal process to their polished external result, and we just conclude we don't have what it takes.
It is a fundamentally unfair comparison. And this is why modeling the messy process is vital, especially in parenting or leadership. Research shows that leaders or parents who visibly model calm problem solving after making a mistake teach the people around them far more about resilience than they ever could through verbal praise.
So showing the work matters.
Hugely. When people see you fail and then see you calmly run the diagnostic test to fix it, it totally normalizes the struggle.
That makes a lot of sense. But what happens when the people closest to you are not modeling resilience? Like, what if you are pursuing a goal and your immediate circle thinks you are crazy and actively discourages you from continuing?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the research on social support is incredibly encouraging here. It shows that you do not need everyone in your life to understand or validate your goal. You do not need a massive cheering section.
You don't.
No, you only need to borrow belief from a tiny, concentrated pocket of genuine support. That could be a single mentor, one specific colleague, or even a highly specialized online forum of strangers who are pursuing the exact same objective. Just one small anchor of genuine validation can counteract a massive wave of general discouragement.
All right, so we have built the system. We have the true growth mindset. We are regulating our emotions with self-compassion to clear our working memory, and we have found our small pocket of support. Now we face the final and arguably most difficult hurdle.
Knowing when to quit.
Exactly. How do you actually know when you should keep going versus when it is genuinely time to cut your losses? Because blind persistence isn't a virtue. Sometimes quitting is the smartest thing you can do.
It absolutely is. And this brings us to the crucial distinction between adaptive persistence and the sunk cost fallacy. The sunk cost fallacy is unhealthy, ego-driven stubbornness.
Like when you keep pouring money into a broken car.
Yes. It is continuing to pour time, money, and emotional energy into a failing endeavor purely because you have already invested so much into it. You aren't continuing because the strategy is sound. You are continuing because you refuse to admit to yourself that your initial decision was wrong.
So how do you bypass the ego and test for that? The research provides a brilliant mental model called the Fresh Start Test.
Yes, I love this one.
It's so good. If you are listening to this and you feel trapped in a goal or a project right now, ask yourself this. If I were starting completely fresh today, knowing everything I know now, but with zero prior investment of time or money, would I still choose to step onto this exact same path?
It's a brutal question to answer, honestly.
It really is. But if your honest answer is no, you are not persisting. You are just trapped in a sunk cost.
Healthy persistence, on the other hand, is entirely adaptive. You are constantly updating your approach based on the reality of the feedback you are getting. To execute this systematically, researcher Gabrielle Uttingen developed a framework called mental contrasting. She popularized it as the WOP method. That is WOOP, wish, outcome, obstacle, plan.
Break down the neuroscience of why that specific acronym matters. Because I know her research completely destroyed the whole just think positive thoughts industry.
It really did. Oettingen found that simply visualizing your wish and a positive outcome actually sabotages your goal.
Wait, visualizing success is bad.
Yeah, because when you vividly imagine succeeding, your brain is tricked into feeling like you have already achieved it. Studies show that people who only use positive visualization experience a measurable drop in their systolic blood pressure. They literally lose the physiological drive and energy required to actually do the hard work.
Oh, wow. So their brain gets the dopamine hit of success without doing any of the lifting.
Exactly. So to generate the necessary friction to move forward, mental contrasting requires you to visualize the wish and the outcome, but then immediately force your brain to identify the specific, realistic internal obstacle standing in your way.
You have to ground it in reality.
Right. Then you create a concrete plan, an if-then scenario, for exactly how you will respond when that obstacle inevitably hits. It marries the motivation of a positive vision with the rugged reality of practical execution.
And as you execute that plan, you have to track your visible progress. During a multi-year pursuit, actively tracking even microscopic wins protects your brain against the effective forecasting we talked about earlier. It prevents discouragement from taking over when the finish line is still miles away.
And crucially, the final piece of this adaptive strategy must include intentional rest. The most counterintuitive reality of persistence is that sustainable grit requires genuine recovery.
It's not just about pushing through sleep deprivation.
No, relentless, unbroken effort does not make you tougher. It just spikes your allostatic load and leads to central nervous system burnout. A well-timed pause preserves your capacity to persist tomorrow.
So healthy persistence isn't a straight line where you just repeatedly crash your head into the exact same brick wall, hoping it magically falls over. It is more like a spiral. You are continuing forward and upward, but you are constantly circling, adjusting your course, running the diagnostics, resting, and adapting based on the actual feedback the world is giving you.
That is a perfect visualization. The spiral represents movement paired with constant learning.
So what does this all mean? When we zoom out and synthesize this massive stack of behavioral research, what is the core truth about the psychology of the people who never give up?
The overarching takeaway is this. Highly persistent people do not experience less failure, less fear, or less friction than the rest of us. They don't possess some magical genetic advantage that makes difficult things easy.
They just process it differently.
Exactly. They have simply learned to interpret the friction differently. They view failure as data rather than a verdict on their worth. They bypass shame using self-compassion to keep their working memory online. They build systems of trust, and they borrow belief from others when they stumble. And they adapt their strategies, understanding that the path to any meaningful goal is a spiral, not a straight line. They simply decide at a foundational level, I am someone who figures it out.
They don't just change their goals, they change their relationship with the struggle itself.
And that leaves us with a final thought to consider today. Something for you to deeply mull over after this deep dive ends. Think back to the last major, meaningful goal that you gave up on. What if you didn't abandon it because you lacked the capability or the talent? What if you gave up simply because the environment you were in at the time had never actually taught you how to fail properly?
Oh, that's a powerful question.
If you took that exact same goal today, and instead of demanding a straight, unbroken line of success, you actively applied the spiral of adaptive persistence. If you brought in the self-compassion to clear your mind, if you borrowed belief from a small pocket of support, and if you used mental contrasting to plan for the obstacles, how might the outcome change?
You hit the game over screen back then. But this time, armed with the actual mechanics of persistence, you know exactly how to hit restart. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you take these tools and apply them to whatever spiral you are navigating right now. Take care of yourselves, run the diagnostics, and keep going.